On a Prayer. Faith is Awaken by Elton Thomas. Episode 1, The Weight of Darkness. The early morning light filtered through the half-closed blinds of Dusty Rhymes's cluttered apartment. Dust motes swirled in the air, illuminated by the pale sun that crept over the city of St. Louis. Dusty sat hunched over his desk, his shoulders slouched, eyes fixed on the flickering screen in front of him. He was surrounded by a sea of papers, photographs, and case files, fragments of broken lives laid bare in the pursuit of justice. The tapping of keys echoed in the stillness of the room. His fingers moved with mechanical precision, entering search queries, cross-referencing databases, and tracking every digital footprint he could find. The job of a Certified Human Trafficking Investigator, CHTI, was never clean, never simple. It was a daily descent into the darkest corners of society. And every day, Dusty wondered how much longer he could bear the weight of it. A photograph lay beside his keyboard. A girl, no older than 14, staring blankly into the camera, her face devoid of hope. Dusty recognized the empty expression. It was one he saw all too often, victims whose innocence had been stolen, whose trust had been shattered. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes with the back of his hand. The girl's file had crossed his desk the day before. Another face, another tragedy, another soul lost to the machine of human trafficking. The weight settled deep in his chest, heavy and suffocating. His apartment was as much a reflection of his mind as it was a workspace. The walls were bare except for a single map of the city, marked with pushpins and red strings connecting locations, massage parlors, truck stops, nightclubs, and seedy motels. Each mark represented a case, each string a lead that could unravel yet another trafficking ring. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and exhaustion. Dusty let out a long sigh, running a hand through his dark brown hair, his light brown eyes dull from lack of sleep. He had been at it for hours, chasing leads that seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. His mind, usually sharp and focused, now felt like a fog. He hadn't had a proper break in days, but the idea of stopping, even for a moment, felt like a betrayal to the victims he had yet to save. He glanced out the window. The city beyond was waking up, oblivious to the horrors hidden in its shadows. To most, St. Louis was just another bustling Midwestern city, restaurants opening, cars filling the streets, children on their way to school. But for Dusty, the city was a labyrinth of secrets, and he was one of the few tasked with navigating its darkest pathways. He pushed his chair back from the desk, the legs scraping against the worn wooden floor, and stood up. His body protested with stiffness, his muscles aching from hours of inactivity. Stretching his arms over his head, he looked around the apartment, as if seeing it for the first time that morning. A half-eaten sandwich sat untouched on the counter, next to a cup of cold coffee. Dusty knew he should eat, should rest, but the thought of closing his eyes, if only for a moment, felt impossible. Not today, he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. He paced the room, trying to shake off the exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin. His mind, though tired, couldn't stop replaying the stories, the interviews, the countless hours spent with survivors who had escaped their captors. They had all described the same thing, a hollow void where their sense of safety had once been. Dusty knew that void all too well. It followed him, gnawing at his conscience, filling every quiet moment with doubt and guilt. His phone buzzed on the desk, the sound pulling him from his thoughts. He grabbed it, glancing at the screen. It was an email from the St. Louis Police Department. Another missing girl. 8 years old. Mila Suero. Dusty's heart clenched as he opened the file attached to the email. A small, innocent face stared back at him, framed by long, curly brown hair. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion, as if she understood the danger she was in but couldn't comprehend why. Mila had been reported missing the night before. The case notes were brief. Last seen in a neighborhood known for its transient population. Mother's name, Mila Suero. No witnesses. He sat down hard, the chair creaking beneath his weight. 8 years old. The age of the victims seemed to drop lower with each case, each file a reminder of how vulnerable children were to the predators lurking in the shadows. Dusty's mind raced. He needed to act fast. He needed to find her before it was too late. As he read through the initial report, his expression hardened, his jaw clenched, and a flicker of anger burned in his chest, a familiar, unwelcome companion. He closed the file and stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. It was his worn, brown leather jacket, the one he always wore when he went out into the field. It had become a part of his armor, a barrier between him and the darkness he faced daily. He took a moment, standing in the center of his apartment, the quiet pressing down on him. His breath came slow and steady, but his mind was a whirlwind of urgency. Dusty wasn't a religious man. Not anymore. He had seen too much, heard too many horror stories to believe in a higher power that allowed such evil to exist. But sometimes, when the world seemed to collapse around him, he found himself wishing for something more, something to lift the unbearable weight off his shoulders. Today was one of those days. He closed his eyes briefly, letting out a breath. "Just let me find her," he whispered to no one in particular. "Please." With that, Dusty turned and headed out the door, the air cold and sharp as he stepped onto the street. The city loomed around him, indifferent to his mission, indifferent to the suffering that lay hidden behind closed doors. But Dusty wasn't indifferent. He couldn't be. As he walked toward his car, his jaw set in determination, the weight of darkness settled back on his shoulders. But this time, there was a spark of hope buried deep within the storm of his mind. Hope that, against all odds, he might find Mila before it was too late.